Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Steve Cannane. Coming up, the Gang of Three claims Kevin Rudd held fake budget meetings to sideline one of his ministers. Sharia banking, what is it and why do some Liberals think it's bad for the country? And when a win on the pokies means a big loss for pensioners. Our panel tonight, New South Wales Greens MP Cate Faehrmann, Luke Malpass from the Centre for Independent Studies, and in Melbourne, Damien Kingsbury from Deakin University. The Prime Minister Julia Gillard has met with the Indonesian President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono in Jakarta. The two leaders discussed a possible clemency deal for Schapelle Corby and Australia's plans for a regional processing centre for asylum seekers. President Yudhoyono says he's not against the proposal, but his country would only give support if a real solution was offered. But the opposition has questioned whether Julia Gillard should be raising the idea with foreign leaders when it's still in the planning stages. Damien, is Julia Gillard likely to have got anywhere with these talks today about a regional processing centre?
President Yudhoyono hasn't shut the door on it, so that's a good start. And of course, we need to see this process conducted over a long period of time with great consultation, and the planning really needs to be done with the countries concerned.
What kind of time frame are we likely to see, Damien? Because I think SBY said something about, we want to see this go to the Bali process.
Yeah, look, we're looking at a long time frame for it. It's not likely to be resolved within the next couple of years. And I think that time frame will allow the government the opportunity to change some of its rhetoric around it. For example, it's now a regional processing centre. East Timor is being explicitly left off the mention list.
What's in it for the Indonesians to get involved with this? I imagine to one degree they might see it as Australia's problem and a problem that a wealthy nation should perhaps solve by itself.
They do. Indonesia does see it as Australia's problem and that we do have a responsibility. Having said that, Indonesia has a very significant refugee problem. It doesn't have very tight border restrictions, so there are masses of people who flock into Indonesia because they can get in easily and then they try to seek asylum from there. So I think that President Yudhoyono would be quite open to having some sort of regional agreement around how this issue can be tackled for the sake of Indonesia as well as for the sake of Australia.
Luke, Scott Morrison, the Liberals immigration spokesman, had a few words to say about this today. He said the Prime Minister should have finalised more details of the plan before advancing it internationally. What do you think? Sorry, Luke, if you could answer that one. Sorry, Damien.
Look, I think he's probably right with that, Steve. I mean, the need for this centre or how to organise processing has been largely driven by domestic political considerations, and so to kind of head off to Indonesia with a bit of a half-baked plan about what you might possibly do to resurrect the Pacific solution in a slightly different name seems to me to be a little bit foolhardy, yes.
Well, one matter that probably didn't come up in that conversation was the torture of Papuan men by Indonesian soldiers. Before the meeting, Julia Gillard wouldn't reveal whether she'd bow to pressure from human rights groups and raise that issue.
President Yudhoyono has already indicated that those matters will be the subject of an investigation. I welcome that.
So you're not going to raise it?
Well, President Yudhoyono has already made it clear that he will have an investigation of those matters and prosecutions will flow from that investigation.
Isn't the relationship mature enough?
President Yudhoyono has already made it perfectly clear that there will be an investigation of these matters.
President Yudhoyono has made it clear he doesn't welcome interference from Australia while promising that investigation.
I am saying now there's no need to put pressure on Indonesia. Indonesia has conducted an investigation. We're even ready to proceed with a military hearing or whatever that forum might be to uphold justice and discipline. So we're going to fulfil our obligation. There wouldn't and couldn't be any pressures from any countries or NGOs.
Cate, should the Prime Minister have raised the issue with President Yudhoyono today?
Absolutely, she should have raised the issue. If Prime Minister Julia Gillard is serious about supporting democracy in Indonesia, she has to show courage and raise issues such as human rights violation. Now, there are gross instances of human rights violation by the Indonesian military, funded by the Australian government, happening right now in West Papua. We've seen evidence of this, and there are serious allegations being raised by organisations and institutions such as Amnesty International and others on the ground. She's raised Schapelle Corby, she's raised Barley 9, and obviously she's raised the Regional Processing Centre. This really should have been top of her agenda.
And we're seeing some of the images there of Papuan men being tortured.
Absolutely disturbing.
Very disturbing.
So disturbing, and the Prime Minister should have raised this.
Damien, Kingsbury, President Udiono says there's going to be an investigation. Can we trust that that investigation will be thorough?
Well, investigations in the past have either found soldiers not guilty of these crimes or they've handed down very light sentences. They never prosecute the people who order the crimes, and that's a real problem. Having said that, Julia Gillard's comments, I think, are probably diplomatic. If Udiono says that he's going to go ahead with an investigation, then she can simply say, and we support that, which he has. And that's probably about as far as she could go. The real issue, though, is that it's not just one incident. It's symptomatic of a wider problem with human rights abuses in West Papua. And there's a bigger issue to be addressed here, and perhaps she should be discussing that bigger issue of the future of West Papua.
And sorry, Damien, I just want to come to you on this issue, is that in this case there's evidence. For years we've heard about human rights abuses coming out of West Papua, the fact that if you raise the independence flag, the Morning Star flag, you can end up in jail. Now we're seeing evidence, and that's the difference in this case, isn't it?
That is absolutely the difference. And, of course, the human rights abuses are widespread and they've been going on for decades. But West Papua was pretty much closed off to the outside world, as East Timor was up until 1999. So getting the hard evidence out to corroborate these claims is always difficult. Now we have it. This is not an isolated incident. It's a tip of a very big iceberg.
Cate, you want to respond?
Yeah, it is a tip of a very big iceberg. We just need to make sure, of course, even if the Prime Minister supports this one investigation, it probably won't be impartial and credible by the Indonesian authorities looking into this. So, who knows what they'll find. But, yes, as Damien said, tip of the iceberg, and we don't know how it will be investigated anyway.
Well, back to domestic politics. And was Kevin Rudd's gang of four really only a gang of three? The Fairfax papers are reporting today that the former Prime Minister was so suspicious that his Finance Minister, Lindsay Tanner, was leaking, he held fake pre-budget meetings. The story says the meetings were deliberately light on detail, and when Mr Tanner left the room, Julia Gillard, Wayne Swan and Kevin Rudd would reconvene and discuss the real plans. Now, Luke, if this story is true, what does this say about the dysfunctionality of Kevin Rudd's government?
I just love the story, Steve, because, for a start, we know that kind of, government by cabinet didn't happen, and we thought it was the gang of four, and now we find out that actually, it was the gang of three, pretending it was a gang of four, and then waiting till Lindsay Tanner left the room to make the real decisions. I mean, you look at this, and the immediate kind of impression I had was this is just childish. I mean, how did this government actually manage to survive for 3 years? And we certainly, if you listen to what's kind of come out of Canberra, Lindsay Tanner was one of the guys who was wanting to actually make some seriously unpopular reforms and rein in some spending, and he was just cut loose from that process. I just think it's incredible.
And Cate, if this is accurate, what does it say about the now Prime Minister and the now Deputy Prime Minister and their ability to govern?
Well, you've got to wonder when Julia Gillard was Deputy Prime Minister whether she actually contradicted the Prime Minister in any of these meetings. It's clear that Lindsay Tanner did on the emissions trading scheme. That was the major one that we knew about at least. So you've got to think that those three, Wayne Swan, Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd, were probably all in agreement. I mean, you can't get much lower than three, really. It's pretty close to one. It's a very small cabinet, and it is obvious that the Prime Minister wasn't great at building consensus. So it suggests potentially that Julia Gillard didn't challenge Kevin Rudd too much in those, what are they now, gang of three.
Damien, Kingsbury, interesting too that Kevin Rudd, himself a man over the years associated with doing a bit of leaking, seemed to be a little bit paranoid of leaking himself.
Well, he was. You've got to keep in mind too that Lindsay Tanner is from the Victorian left, and of course Kevin Rudd's a right-wing member. Julia Gillard is also from the left, but the New South Wales left, which is a different animal altogether. So ideologically, Lindsay Tanner was isolated in that group in any case, and his views would not have been consistent with those of the then Prime Minister, the now Prime Minister, or the Treasurer. So it's not surprising that he was isolated, and it's not surprising he resigned from Parliament.
And of course, Julia Gillard's response to this is she doesn't discuss what goes on in cabinet meetings. But this was not a cabinet meeting, and she wouldn't be discussing detail if she confirmed or denied this report.
It's like Uber cabinet. It's the cabinet within the cabinet.
Micro cabinet, I think.
Well, the Reserve Bank has spoiled the Melbourne Cup party, raising official interest rates by 0.25% to 4.75%. Already, the Commonwealth Bank has announced it will surpass that with a 45 basis point hike. And Treasurer Wayne Swan wasn't too happy about that move.
This is a cynical cash grab by the Commonwealth Bank. There's no other way to look at it. I think Australians deserve a lot better, especially on Melbourne Cup Day, than to have this sort of cynical decision from the Commonwealth Bank. And all I can say is it's little wonder that so many Australians are so angry with our banks after watching the behaviour of the Commonwealth Bank today.
Luke, is this playing into Joe Hockey's hands that Wayne Swan is all talk and no action on the banks?
On Melbourne Cup Day, of all things. My goodness, how could they? How un-Australian of them. Yeah, look, I think it is. And I think, Wayne Swan's talked tough on this for the last 3 years, and he hasn't done anything about it because he knows that he doesn't need funding. He doesn't believe in kind of, re-regulating the banking system. And I think Joe Hockey's choice of words last week was unfortunate because when his 9-point plan kind of came out, it was quite reasonable.
Which has now moved on to arguing for competition, which no one argues against, really.
Well, exactly, yeah, like arguing against apple pie and motherhood, really. I think this does play into his hands, but hopefully it plays into some of the positive ideas he had about essentially having a new kind of Wallace inquiry to check out the Australian banking system, something that Professor Ian Harper has very much supported, I know, and rather than kind of build into some sort of rabid anti-bank populism, then it could be very constructive, I think.
Cate, is this gouging by the Commonwealth Bank to raise their variable mortgage rates by 45 basis points?
Potentially it is. I mean, we've just seen some of the profits being announced by the NAB and the ANZ. I'm not sure whether the Commonwealth has come out recently and announced super profits, but billions of dollars worth of profits. And, I think the households clearly are feeling the pinch. Joe Hockey came out, as you said, last week and started calling them on it, and I think the Greens supported him on that. Now, what we do need, I think, is an investigation into the bank's profits, and we need to be kind of opening this up. This is extraordinary. Really, the billions of dollars worth of profits that these four